office data. They're figuring out what kind of things to send out. Usage data, maybe just the raw data, right? So they say, don't worry, we've got it, right? Do you want to do the mic? Okay. Okay. That's that. Okay, cool. So they say, don't worry, we've got it. Maybe they say, well, it's anonymized. It's not going to be associated with you anyway. Well, there's ways around it, but okay. Maybe they say it's secure, right? They go, oh, don't worry, we've got it. It's secure. It's aggregated. You're just a drop in the bucket. No one's going to know who you are, right? But you are sending this data that comes from the inside of your home. It's from your body that is being calculated, and sometimes maybe from inside your body. And you're sending it to the internet, right? And you're doing it voluntarily. And okay, but there's a benefit, right? That's the bottom line is I get a benefit out of this. But the question is, are you the customer of this service, or are you the product, right? Is that company in the business of selling your data to somebody else, or are you deriving, is that hardware really benefiting you directly? And so, and is that hardware really there to benefit you, or is it just the front, data collection front for the service? That's, I think, a key question to ask whenever we're dealing with any of these wearables, whenever we're dealing with these home automation services, or office type things as well. So, general rule I found is if the company has some VC funding and they resell the data and their idea of security really extends to, well, we've got SSL on it, you're the product, right? So I would sit there and I would ask this question: is there any part of that core product that just needs to be on the cloud? That functionally without it, the product will not function? And really, most of the time, the odds are no. Your Fitbit, for example, collects data. That data is then synced with your phone. Most of the key functions of that could sit on the phone, right? It doesn't need to be on the server. They don't do anything specific. They do some social sharing, but that's not the core function of the device. The core function of the device is to give you insight into your exercise, right? If it was sold as a sharing device, that's one thing, but it's being sold as something to help you track your device. A Nest is sold as a way to monitor and better control the temperature in your house. I would argue that that device itself could be doing the thing directly without going to the internet. There really is no need for it, right? Now, are there some alternatives to this approach? Do you need to send all that data all the way to the cloud? Well, there's several places where you can actually store this data, and you can do analytics on it. It could be on the device itself with a very small amount of effort that Fitbit could store. In fact, it does store, right, until you sync. So there is storage on it already. It could be doing some processing. It has a BLE chip that probably has an ARM core in it and can do some analytics right there on the device if they so chose to do that. It can go to the gateway. The gateway is your phone or your router or some alternative device. Your phone, our phones now have dual and quad core processors with ridiculous amounts of memory and storage capability. An iPhone has 128 gigs of storage now. Like, you can have a quad core processor on your Android phone. So you could be doing these kinds of things on the devices themselves, but they choose not to. Instead, they send it all the way to the server. And so the question then becomes, what data absolutely really needs to be there? And where does it need to go? So an alternate to that could be a local private hub, right? So that thing would sit between the gateway and the device, possibly. Or it could be on the other side of it if it's going to the web. And that could contain, if you really needed to get the stuff off the device, if you really needed to go out without having to go, you could have a private hub. It could do some local processing. It could have some secure storage, talk to the internet even, have to do encryption. It could be a server. You could be talking to that local device of yours. And it could be a gateway between different protocols, right? Now, one of the problems, right, you have with your BLE devices today is it talks to your phone. Well, what happens if you leave your phone in another room? Can't talk to it. What do? It's useless. If it's getting notifications, if the phone is in the other room, what do? Well, you could have a hub that acts as a gateway between them. You could have a whole bunch of hubs and mesh and cover your entire house, right? And leave your phone behind and still get all the functionality. Didn't affect the server one bit. It doesn't need to be there. Now, one argument is, well, these kinds of home hubs, these intermediary hubs, they're expensive. They need to be large and powerful, and that's, bill of material is too much. The smart things, I don't know if you guys have heard of them, make home automation type things. And their hub is a dumb PIC processor, which just takes all of your stuff from Zigbee and Z-Wave, I think, and it sends it straight out to their server. And their argument is, we do all the processing on the server, we do all the filtering on the server, and that's where it should be. And it really doesn't need to be, because they have a motion sensor. I happen to have that system. I unplugged it. The motion sensor is sending motion sensor data from inside my house to their server. I don't know where their server is. I don't know what kind of control they have on it. But people know who's in my hallway because I volunteered to tell them that. So I've talked to them. I've said, can't you make that hub be more powerful? And they said, well, yes, we're planning on it. I said, can't you run all your rules for notification on that hub? Well, and it's not enough horsepower. It's lazy engineering, or it's their business model. I would argue it's their business model. But these hubs don't have to be expensive. They don't have to be large. They don't have to be super powerful. A Raspberry Pi could be that. It runs Linux. It has enough processing on it. You've got a little SD card. Maybe you could run it on that. Raspberry Pi costs $60 if you add a Wi-Fi and a Bluetooth dongle to it, right? You can add additional storage. You can run Linux on it. It can act as a server. It could run web services on it. I've run MongoDB on a Raspberry Pi. It works. It's great. A Pogo plug is out there. It's a product that's been shipping for a few years. It costs $50. It has a gigabit Ethernet. It has USB and SD card in it. And it's got a server and Linux. You can add on the services that you need into it. Anybody can add on services to it onto it. Even better, have you guys seen these? Intel Edisons? Intel's booth is over there. If you haven't checked it, definitely check it before you go. This is literally how big it is, this little card. And in it is a dual-core Atom x86 processor and a Quark real-time processor. This thing has 1 gig of RAM, 4 gigs of SD storage, of which like 3 is available once Linux is in it. It runs real Linux. It has Wi-Fi, Bluetooth Classic, and Bluetooth LE inside this whole thing. It can run an entire server right on it. It's got 40 I/O ports. I've run Postgres and Node.js on it, literally on this little thing. It's got MQTT so you can mesh them together, and it's $50 retail, all right? So if you take one of these and put it in a wall wart, and this could be your intermediary, I would say for a retail price less than $100, you could have all of that services that everybody claims without the data having to leave your house. But, so they can be inexpensive, they can be small and powerful, something like this. So the alternative is the wearable through BLE can go to one of these things, right? And this thing can then become the gateway, and this thing stores the data. It can also go to the phone if you want to go through the phone, if you've paired through it, but this gives you an alternative. Another one is to act as a proxy. It's got Wi-Fi, right? So your Nest could talk to this thing, and then that thing can act in between. Or you can have a mesh. You can have a bunch of these all over your house. Leave your phone. Don't need to. The advantage is you can continue using the devices. So you can architect these kinds of things today with existing technology. This isn't sci-fi. So you can run storage, analytics. This can be a push notification server that directly does it. It can be a protocol translator. All of these things for the core of this, for under $100, you can run all of that stuff today. And you can make a mesh. You can make it be a range extender. You can do RAID. You can do all these things. It's completely doable. So very good price to power ratio, and they're open and they're secure. You can get encryption. You can do all of that stuff on it. So the excuse of having the device be too expensive, the bomb goes away. You can do for under $100. This is unit one. I bet you if you made 1,000 of these, you could get them under $50. The Pogo plug is $50, but it doesn't have all the stuff that this thing does. Complexity. Well, this is all in one, and it's certified in 60 countries. You can run all your analytics on it. You've got a dual core processor running on this thing. It's got enough horsepower to do some kind of analytics. Now, granted, if you're going to do global social analytics over everybody, if the core of the product needs that, okay, then there's a good reason to send the stuff to the server. But I don't think you need to for most of the cases of everything I've seen so far come down the pipe. That's a sub-feature which is optional, I think. And the social sharing part, you can choose what to goes out on these. These are on the internet. This thing has a Wi-Fi. You can actually directly send things to based on what you want instead of opaquely what is sitting on the server. The only question then becomes a business model. Really, that's the only excuse left to force everything to go to the cloud. And that takes me back to the question I asked, which is the hardware there for your benefit, or is it the service and part of their business model is to collect that data? In this conference, I've heard lots of times sort of taken for granted it's the Internet of Things, right? So it automatically goes on the internet. But I would argue that it doesn't need to, because that question of the balance between transparency and privacy, no one's addressed it. It's just automatic. People just do it because it's a lazy and easy and cheap thing to do. So no excuses. And so please stop sending my stuff. So you can only send what you want. And I think it's doable today. So, any questions? Yep. So, go ahead. Yes,
the business model argument, I'm sure it's right, and yet I don't understand what the business model is. If I want to turn my lights on and off using my TCP light bulbs, I'm going to their free server that is costing them money to maintain.
Yes.
Are they going to charge me a subscription in the future to turn my lights on and off? I mean, what is the business model?
So far, it hasn't been the case. I think part of it is some business model, depending on how much money they can get on the analytics, right? Nest at Google I/O, they got bought for $2.3 billion, and part of their story was they collect data from inside your house, and Google likes to have all the information hoovered in, and this thing was a conduit to all that data. So for the first time, they got the data from inside your houses voluntarily. It's a pretty gadget. It sends them, presence data, it sends them proximity data, it sends them all kinds of stuff and meshes to a whole slew of other things that they've got planned for doing home automation, right? So the business model there is they collect the data and they can run analytics that matches some other business goal. But I don't know what it is, you don't know what it is, and in the future they can turn around and sell those insights back to you for a fee, or try to make the product better. But I don't think that it's there right now. There's no need for it.
Yeah.
So
Well, I actually do believe in the analytics. I don't believe in like Big Brother, blah, 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 but my business is big data.
Okay.
But I do believe like the analytics are useful. It's just how you anonymize that data. So do you have any recommendations as to, if you, I believe strongly that the more data you get,
right,
the better analytics you're going to have, the better
sure
product you're going to be able to offer somebody, as far as from even the Fitbit.
Okay.
You notice that people are doing intervals, they're doing longer runs, maybe their heart rate,
Right.
There's a whole bunch of stuff. How would you recommend anonymizing data to get it out there, to do the analytics, keep people safe?
Sure. The first thing I would do, I'm doing a lot of connected projects with people.
Yeah.
And one of the first things I would suggest people do, the product developers do, is just taking and stripping out the ID, individual ID isn't enough. What I would do is I would do a first line aggregation on the device itself or on the gateway, instead of sending the raw data.
Oh, I agree.
And so that way you cannot glean the reverse back of what that person did on an atomic level.
Totally. So abstract the data in a model even before it leaves the device.
Yes.
So then you're not dealing with people or identities, anything. You're just dealing with data.
Yep.
And then it's better for your business model anyway, because then you get away from the paranoia
Yes.
of people going, they're watching me, especially when it gets to, we also do computer vision.
Yes.
So especially when it comes to vision, because you don't want raw image data going across.
Dropcam sends your video data and stores it on their server, and you're very happy to do it, but they have all of the video from inside your house.
Right.
I personally think that's just crazy.
Yeah.
Because why? Because I don't, I don't want to set up a little server at home. They can sell you a product, that stores and does all of that stuff, but their business model requires you to subscribe to a service.
Right.
They could still subscribe. They can have that server sitting in your home without it needing to hit the, and you can get remote access. There's tunneling through your router is a known technology. This problem was solved years ago. So all of that. The other part of it also, I think, is in order to anonymize this stuff, is not just necessarily, but you know, aggregate this stuff, but also to understand what you need. If there's be transparent about what you're taking off those devices. Right now, you don't know what the data is that they're collecting on the other side. It's all wrapped into, and the raw data is stored somewhere, and I don't know what's done with it. I'm not being tinfoil hat about it. I'm just like, if you don't tell me what you're doing with this stuff, why?
I think you're right. I mean, even if the company had the best intentions,
Right.
If somebody else gets access to that, I mean, there's a ton of data that's getting disaggregated.
Also, I don't buy the fact that it's not identifiable, because you can uniquely identify people based on multiple data points.
Right.
So you can say, because this thing was here and that thing here, completely disparate and unrelated. But if you sort of cross-correlate those, you can have a very unique identifiable token that is associated, and that means only me.
Well, they already do that with the IP sniffing.
There you go. So, yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So Apple recently introduced HealthKit, and the idea seems to be that they want to make the iPhone the hub to talk about it.
Yes.
What's your take on that?
The Apple HomeKit stuff? Yeah.
HealthKit? HomeKit.
It's HomeKit, I think, yeah? Is that the one?
They got HealthKit for your...
HealthKit is your buddy stuff, and so personally, I think there's two things about HomeKit. One is the fact that it's not cross-platform. That's a technical issue. The quibble I have with them is a problem, because when it comes to the home, if my wife doesn't have the exact same kind of device that I have, then she can't turn off the lights. So that's one problem I have with it. And so, sorry, I'm in charge of the lights because I bought a HomeKit adapter, and you don't have that, so tough. That's one thing. The other part of it is, though, that you're still sending that information to the cloud. Now, Apple has had a track record, at least, of saying, we don't use that data. We don't do anything with that data. We don't do, you own the data. So far, they've built that trust in the consumer that that's what they're going to do. Google has a corresponding exact same sort of strategy going forward. And Samsung just bought SmartThings. They all have this track record history of trying to do analytics on that data based on what you're doing. So I think there's that element of trust building, consumer trust building. It needs to be stronger on the Google side of things. The Apple side of things, the issue is going to be who owns the data, and the device vendors who are going to try to comply with that. They're going to try to sell into a wealthy, Apple consumer crowd. But Apple is going to insist that data sit on the server, on in the iCloud enclosure. I think there's going to be an issue of allowing the companies that are going to want the data, and Apple is going to say, you don't own the data, we have it. So I think that whole thing needs to be resolved as far as the ownership, which goes back to my point.
So when I read about HealthKit, right now the data does not even go to iCloud, it stays on the device.
HealthKit is different. Yeah, HealthKit.
From the phone, it can go to your health provider.
Yes. So HealthKit is a separate story. HealthKit is the data stays on your phone into secure storage. You have to explicitly allow that data to go out. And so far, Apple said you cannot send that data out unless you get permission. But those rules are changing. It's going to change because sorry?
It's a HIPAA compliance thing, I think.
Yeah, so their model is, that's a different model. That model is the data is staying on your device for the HealthKit stuff. And I think part of it is because of HIPAA and all the other things that you have to go through before they can release it, push it out. But for the HomeKit stuff, I think there's going to be this coming conflict, built-in conflict between the fact that data is, the vendor of the device wants the data, and Apple, as your proxy, is saying, no, it belongs to so-and-so. The resolution of it, one resolution of it, I think is going to be that the Apple TV device is going to become exactly what I just put out. That's going to be your home hub. Your HomeKit hub and possibly your HealthKit hub as well, which is going to do local processing, local storage, local analytics. All that stuff is going to run on that device because that's what it's for. It's already wired in. It has BLE. It's going to do the routing. It's going to be all of that stuff. A company like Cisco that makes routers should be making smart routers for all of this stuff, which is tied in as a gateway between different protocols with local storage, and they should open up what kind of apps you're going to run on those devices, and then let these device manufacturers implement and install that onto that. That's what I would do.
Can you imagine Comcast would want these under set-top box?
Comcast is going to want to get on it. You bet. Comcast is going to want to get in on that, and they're already, for the home automation stuff, they already have the home security automation thing, right? But they haven't quite figured it out yet because they bought all their home automation stuff from a third party. And so that's a whole nother...
Getting sued for stuff.
Yeah. Their model was not well thought out enough because they're not a tech company. But an Apple and a Google and those guys and a Samsung will do that. So the question becomes, as developers of these technologies, how do we model this thing? You know, it's not okay, I think, to send it.
It's going to be legislation, isn't it? I mean, it's the only way.
Yeah, eventually it might be. But legislation is always a trailing indicator. It's like things go wrong and they get really wrong and they get really, really wrong, and then some people come in and say, okay, now let's stop doing this. Right? So, but as designers and developers of these technologies, as people who like us who come up with these things, if we just think up front how to make these things, then you avoid a lot of these issues. Plus, I think you can sell more product. If you've got a hub that does all of this stuff and lets you wander around without your phone and proxies all this stuff, you got yourself another cool product, and you can now sell this thing as, hey, it's private. You own the data. So send it out. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Oh, actually, I was just going to make a quick comment. You know, I think part of the reason may just be as simple as they don't even know how they'll make a profit off of it yet. Right. They look at Facebook and they go, hey, you know, when it was in a dorm, they had no idea how to sell it.
Right.
They didn't even think of it. And then the other thing is there seems to be this undercurrent that all the VCs love right now, which is devices are being so commoditized. If you create a business entity, how are they going to profit long term?
Right.
Well, as long as we have, be it eyeballs or be it pulse, you know,
right.
we're going to figure out a way. And you know, let's face it, the ethics on Wall Street didn't help. So
yeah, I mean, the part that I find mystifying, I mean, I'm a user of all of these devices. Don't get me wrong. But as a developer and maker of these things, I also sit and think about the fact that the policy decisions they make as to where the data ends up, it's not transparent. That's the part that bothers me. Is if I knew where it was going and I could say, okay, I agree, you can use it in this way, I'd be fine with it. Maybe, right? But I think there's better ways that, like you were asking, how you can make it safer, so you don't have a target type bad thing. A target was a credit card, right? You know, if somebody breaks into the SmartThings server, those guys are device makers. They're not security, enthusiasts. So
it's a great space for some business to start.
Right. So, geez. I pose this as a challenge to us as the makers of these things to come up with ways to make it so that not automatically sending stuff to the cloud, I think, is the lazy engineering solution and the unsafe one. I don't think the minute somebody breaks into the treasure trove of all of your data statistics and figures out your patterns of use or something that you don't want them doing with that thing, the trust is going to go away and everybody out of the pool. So, okay.
What are your thoughts on the all-join framework? Because if I remember it well, in terms of messaging and notification, the framework is pretty smart on that. It doesn't send everything to the cloud.
Yes.
So it goes down directly.
All-join is awesome. Yep.
Have you been experiencing developing on it yourself?
All-join has a lot of good things going for it, and some of the things that they need to do for meshing, I think, is good. They've got a very good idea about but they started before a lot of these things kind of, like these issues came to the front. And so more people should be using frameworks like that to push them to think about where the storage of the data goes. And everybody who's making these devices now, they're kind of reinventing the wheel, right? It's all ad hoc. So I know I've worked on a bunch of projects with people now that are making wearable devices, and they don't know anything about the server side. So they go, okay, well now how about we send this stuff to the server? It's like, okay, well let's just throw it onto Parse. Let's just throw it onto AWS, and everybody is sort of reinventing the same thing, and their natural, cheap, easy way to do it is to just throw it onto a server and then figure out what to do with the data. So well thought out policy, deep things like all join. I think that's a great approach to say, look, it needs experience from people who make these things to go in and push them to think about some of these issues. But so yeah, I mean, I'm all for it. They've looked at these. This is not a new problem. Those guys have tried to give you solutions so that you can easily partition your data and mesh things and sync up some of these things very nicely together. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.